Hello, everyone. Dr. Yonit Arthur here. You are on the Steady Coach, and it is my great pleasure today to welcome you to yet another success story interview. This one coming to you from the wonderful Joella. This success story interview is near and dear to my heart because Joella was diagnosed with something that many of you have been told is incurable or requires very specialized and expensive treatments in order to get better from it. Joella had motion-induced MdDS or Mal de Debarquement Syndrome that was brought on by a cruise, and Joella is now fully recovered and ready to share the story of how she got there. So Joella again goes into the full story. She tells you all the various tools she used. She shares some tools here that we haven't talked about in previous success stories. So I know that you're going to learn a lot, but most importantly, anyone listening to this or watching this on YouTube, I want you to get a sense of hope from hearing this story, knowing that just like PPPD, vestibular migraine, and many of the other symptom-based diagnoses we talk about on my channel, MdDS is something that you can recover from. If you enjoy this kind of content, please let me know. Please like, share, subscribe to my channel if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please follow the podcast. Please leave the podcast a review. All of these things help me reach more people and get this content out there to people who need to hear it. And now, without further ado, please enjoy this interview with Joella. Okay, Joella, we are on, and I am so excited to finally meet you, finally talk to you, finally have this interview.
Yeah.
You
Me
have
too.
been, well, I remember where you were when you first joined the membership community, and you have been like a beacon of light for people in the membership community
I hope
as
so.
you really have, as you've made your recovery. You've been so forthcoming, so generous with everything you've shared. So this interview, I have been looking forward to it since the day you referenced it, and now it's finally happening. So thank you
Yeah.
again just so much for spending the time with me.
Yeah. And I am so excited to be in a position where I can give a recovery interview.
I know. Yeah, I know. I know. I know. A lot of people talk about that and they're like, I don't know if I'm ready because I'm afraid I'll jinx it. But I mean, the fact that you're already at the point where you're like, okay, I can actually talk about this
Yeah.
really tells me you're getting exactly to where you want to be.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm there.
You're there. Okay. All right. So let's just kind of step into this by you telling us a little bit about yourself. So who is Joella?
Yeah. So I'm Joella. I live in Utah.
Mhm.
I claim New England as home.
Mhm.
My husband and I travel around a lot. We've lived in a lot of different places, and this is certainly not our last stop,
Mhm.
but it's where we're at now. I have 3 kiddos, an 8-year-old daughter, and then 3-year-old twins. Yeah, yep, they're a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love things like fitness. When I used to live on the ocean, I love diving. Where we're at now, we're like an hour from Zion National Park. So if you can kind of get a vision of that landscape, lots of hiking,
Wow.
rock climbing, things like that. So kind of
Oh.
outdoorsy,
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Wow. Wow. First of all, Zion is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my entire life. One of the highlights
Really
of my
beautiful.
life was hiking in there.
Yeah.
But also, what I'm struck by, I hear from different professionals who come across my stuff and are like, "Oh, talk to me more about how you're doing this or what you're seeing," who said, "Oh, it's deconditioning and, lack of health that's causing people to come down with these illnesses." And then I hear stories like yours. I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
that is not what was going on here
No,
for you."
I mean, I'm 39 years old, and I'm probably at least when this happened, in the best shape of my life.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
that was not the case. I'm building back up to that, as I've healed, but it's certainly not a deconditioning condition.
Right. Oh, no, 100%. So what happened? How did all this get started?
Yeah. So, my family and I and a bunch of friends, actually, there was like 20 of us. We all went on a cruise.
Mhm.
We took a 7-day cruise down to Mexico.
Mhm.
Great time. nothing to really cite on the cruise itself. Came home, I would say it was like maybe 2 or 3 days later, we're all feeling the after motion of a cruise, which I've been on cruises before that didn't really throw me for a loop at all.
So that's
and
happened to you before where
yeah,
you had after motion. Yeah.
yes. And even if I've gone to a theme park all day and ridden roller coasters, like I'll come home and lay in bed and be like, oh, I'm on a roller coaster, So after motion isn't something that necessarily trips me up. And I think it got to be around like the 3rd or 4th day. And my husband and I were both still feeling it. And he was like, I hate this so much. I can't stand it. Like, when is this going to go away? And I was like, oh, like, this is probably the last day, but here, let me prove it to you. And I got my phone out and I looked it up. Yeah. And I saw that, Mal de Debarquement can last a lifetime. And this is probably going deep pretty quickly, but when you get these conditions, these neural circuit conditions, you really start to do some deep dives into like your emotional states, your stressors, like who am I, what has made me the way I am. And one of the things that I kind of came across was that I have I don't have a true health anxiety neural pathway, but by the time I was 16, I had lost 5 grandparents, an aunt, and my dad and my stepdad. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so I think from a pretty formative age, I had learned if somebody gets sick, it's the worst case scenario. And I don't even think I was conscious of this, right? And so I'm pretty sure I read that and my brain was like, great idea. That's what we're doing, And so the next day his was gone and I was like, I still have mine and I still have mine. And it got to be continuing. And it just kind of didn't go away. My brain latched onto it and that was it. I will say that
I'm going to pause you for a second. I'm just curious. Can you describe to me, like, what happened in your body when you read that? It can last for a lifetime. There are no treatments. Like, what happened? Do you remember feeling like, oh God?
I remember thinking like, those poor people, like,
okay,
I can't even imagine. And I think it was definitely a subconscious thing where my brain latched onto it. I don't think I was conscious of that decision or even really recognized fear at that moment. But I will say, I think that MdDS is different than some of the other neural circuit conditions. With triple PD or like vestibular migraine or some of these other things that you talk about a lot. I mean, it must be terrifying. You wake up all of a sudden one day and you're just dizzy out of nowhere. And you're like worried and you're going down these paths of like, is it a brain tumor? Like, what could possibly be going wrong with my body? And for me, I think the fear was different, right? My fear, I knew it was MdDS. I had read it and then I got it. So my fear was very much so around, is this forever? Is this my new life? Like, what will I do if this is my forever? Will my kids ever know the real me? And so it was that cyclical fear that I think kept my symptoms going, as opposed to, what is this thing? And, am I going to be okay?
Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah.
And so I think as the fear set in a little bit more, I definitely started to get worse. And as you know, you get worse and you get more scared and then you get more scared and then you get worse. And so mistake maybe number 2, I joined the Facebook group. And, it was just doomsday, right? And there's people, it's like not even just down pessimistic, it's snarky. I mean, I remember like somebody was like, oh, like, it's my 10-year anniversary. Happy anniversary to me. It's a tough community to be in. And this was a little bit later. I started to feel just a smidge better. And I think I posted in that group, like, okay, I'm feeling this. Like, am I on the right track? And the comments back were like, don't get your hopes up. This thing is just ever evolving. Like, just be ready for the ride, because that doesn't mean anything. And,
Wow.
you know, these are the things that are doubling down on your symptoms and your fear and making that just go sideways even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So give me a sense of the timeline here. So you went on the cruise,
Mm.
it kept going. Third or fourth
Yeah.
day, you saw the dire diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, you joined the groups. The symptoms kept
Yeah.
going.
That was probably maybe, I think that I didn't even join the group until like 3 weeks in, because I had read, that up until 30 days, like mal de Debarquement is this is like normal.
Right.
It's transient. It was I wasn't even too concerned until I was getting worse,
Mm-hmm.
because that fear started to set in. And the longer I was taking to get out of this, I thought, oh, 2 weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's mal de Debarquement is tough because there's all these timelines with it. It's like, oh, 2 weeks, you'll be fine. And then if you don't hit 2 weeks, then it's 30 days and then you'll be fine. And then if you don't get better in 30 days, like you better try to get rid of it in 4 months, or then you're going to have a problem. And then it's 6 months, and then it's a year. And then there's like all these timelines with it that just are terrifying. And so I think around week 3, I was like, I need support. And I joined the group. And I think, I don't know at what point, maybe around a month in, my symptoms really started to worsen. I had developed a physical sway at this point, so it wasn't just like a mental dizziness. At some points I was walking assisted with people. I didn't recognize it at the time because I've never been an anxious person, but the anxiety was building in my body. And one day, I was laying on the couch and I started to get physically ill. So I ran to the bathroom, and my mom at this point was here pretty consistently, and she was like, I think we need to go to the doctor. Like, we need to just make sure that you're okay. And so we went to the emergency room and we had some tests, the MRI and some blood work and some basic tests, just to make sure that everything was okay. And I walked in there and he's like, so what's wrong with you? And I was like, this is wrong with me. I stood up and I was just like, swaying. And he's like, okay, I've never heard of this. And, which is also reassuring. And then at the end of it, he gave me some Ativan and, ran the tests, and then was like, I'll write you a prescription. I think I just said this to you the other day. Like, I'll write you a prescription to stay off your computer. And, it's right. In hindsight, like, it's right, trying to not build on that fear. That was the right recommendation. But in the moment, it's belittling, and you're coming in there scared and you have these symptoms that you don't understand. And he says to just stay off your computer.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you're going to get fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. Whew. Wow.
So, like I said, as an MdDS person, I wasn't super fearful of, what was potentially seriously wrong with me. So I don't have a ton of testing that happened. I know that that's a big part of a lot of people's stories. But I did try just about everything under the sun to try to get better. And it seemed like in the beginning, I was having an appointment every other day, from like, acupuncture, craniosacral, chiropractic, massage, like a guided hypnosis or meditation. Like, it did trivestibular therapy. I did have an actual VNG later in this process. It was, herbalist, talking to a master herbalist, muscle testing. I mean, you name it. Like, I was like, I will try anything, because I didn't want to live like this anymore. And eventually I did just, somewhere in there, I went to my primary care physician, and he was much more calm and he was more reassuring. He had a patient that had MdDS before, so he knew what it was. And he was just like, what helped him was some vestibular therapy and time. Like, it's just going to take time, and, you need to try to stay calm as possible. So he did write me a prescription for clonazepam. I started taking that. And that did help, right? It's got a vestibular suppressant element to it. It also keeps you calm, which so much of this is anxiety and fear. So my symptoms started to go down. And then one night, my son Rhett was hospitalized. Not anything serious, just he had a cold, a virus, then upper respiratory, just couldn't flush it out. His O2 was a little bit low. So they wanted to just keep an eye on him. But I was like, okay, well, I want to make sure that I'm on if the nurse needs me or something happens. So I'm not going to take my medication tonight. And this was probably about 3 or 4 weeks after I've been taking the clonazepam. So maybe we're talking 2 months into this altogether. And I was laying in the bed with him and I was drifting off, and the bed was just like ship in a storm, not just like light swaying, but like rocking so hard that I had to get up and take some medication. And, you know, it really scared me because it felt like my body was quickly becoming dependent on this medication to be okay. And so, you know, and the other thing I think that was really important, I kept telling my husband, like, I don't know, am I healing or is this the medication just masking my symptoms?
Because we know it does work. I mean, clonazepam does. It does mask symptoms in many cases. Yeah.
Right. And so it was critical for my psyche to know that like this was me. And if I just got off the medication, I wasn't going to slide backwards, like, you know, 10 steps. And so I made a commitment at that point between feeling worried about, you know, becoming dependent and wanting to know that it was me that was healing. I started to wean off the clonazepam. So yeah, so at that point, it got kind of scary because the symptoms were rapidly expanding, right? And we know that this is true with symptom drift. And so I was not only having the dizziness, but I started to get visual symptoms.
Okay.
And that was
by dizziness. Can you describe it for us for a second? Like what you had been experiencing up until that point?
Yeah, it was definitely I mean, I was physically swaying. I was, you know, if I stood still, I was doing this. I felt very much like I was still on the boat, you know, so a rocking sensation for me was very prominent.
And it was worse when you were still.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it was kind of 24/7, but it was classic, right? Like when I would get in the car, it would disappear.
Okay.
So I really presented MdDS like exactly the way you see it presented or it is described in the textbook or online, you know.
Right. Okay.
So I started to have some visual symptoms. There was like a vibration to my vision. And I remember my little girl walking up to me and I was like looking at her face, and I could, like the edges of her face and her nose, like there was a vibration to it. And it was just another one of those things where I was like, what if I can never see her face again? You know, what if I can never see like what things look like again? And of course, like typical things too, like carpets and anything with the busy pattern definitely took, you know, that vibration. And there was also like a lag. It was almost like if I turned my head, it was like my eyes would come around second. And those were probably some of the more disturbing symptoms. I would have neck pain, and that was frustrating too. Neck pain and headaches, because even if you weren't dizzy, like you didn't feel great. And so,
like, did you have kind of like a flu-like thing going on, like where you felt like kind of achy and gross?
Yeah, like it was just stiff, you know, a tightness in my neck, and then it would radiate up into like a headache. And then I would get like ear fullness, ringing in my ears. I had like this annoying twitch over my left eye. You know, it was just like a host of bizarre symptoms. And like one time I took this road trip and I was like, oh, I'm not dizzy. And so then everything else started to like pop up, because it was like, well, I got to get something out, you know, like, and I started to get insomnia. That was probably around 6 weeks to 2 months in. Again, I think that's kind of when things started to peak for me. Because I wasn't getting better. And again, like I didn't recognize it as anxiety, but it was all tied to that. So I was getting like these electrical zaps in the night. And it just felt like you stuck your finger like in an electrical socket, like your whole body would jolt. And I would get them like 30 to 40 times a night.
I'm glad you mentioned this. People ask about this. Yeah.
And I can remember one night in particular, like I started to count them, and I had gotten to 10, and I rolled over and I looked at the clock, and it had been an hour. And I was just like, this is the worst night of my life. It's just, it takes you to some crazy places. And again, like, it was all tied up in anxiety. And I've never been that anxious person, but I mean, it got to the point where like I was like that, like I couldn't sit still, and I couldn't get a word out, and I was constantly twitching. And if you didn't know, like, you would have thought I was like detoxing off of a medication or something. And I would get to the point where like my legs would be like violently shaking, and if I got those to finally like take a deep breath and calm down, then I'd have to get up and pace, or I'd have to like yell, or it was just like this energy that was coursing through me. One night my sister came over and like cooked me dinner, and she told me later, she's like, I just sobbed the whole way home. She's like, because seeing you, she's just like, you were gone. Like, that wasn't you anymore. That person was no longer with us. And it just, I was angry, like, again, that energy, like I was frustrated and angry, and I would lash out. And I also never been a super angry person. Like, if anything, I'm a sad person when I get emotional. And it was like such a weird thing to come to terms with and like learn and how to handle.
Wow. Wow. I'm so glad you're speaking to this, because I don't know that I've had someone in any of the interviews up until now describe that emotional process so much, and kind of what that felt like to be in the throes of that kind of anxiety.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard. And it got to the point, again, my family was starting to get really worried because I had this whole personality shift. I didn't know how to handle it. I was losing weight. I was pretty lean. And I lost like 10 pounds in 3 weeks because I couldn't eat. I couldn't keep food down. I was vomiting all the time. And it was a really, these were the points where it was like, it was just getting crazy. And you're right. Like, it's not just physical. Like, a couple anecdotal stories, like my little guy, you're trying to hide it from the kids as best as you can and trying to be you as best as you can. And I thought, well, my older daughter, she sees it, but my 3-year-olds, I'm doing a decent job keeping this from them. And we were sitting at dinner one night, and he just looked at me like right in the eyes and was like, Mommy, I miss you.
Oh.
And I was like, like, it still gets me like kind of choked up. And I'm like, buddy, I'm right here, like, what do you mean you miss me? And he's like, I know, Mommy, I just really miss you. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I said, it still like gets me, because he could see it. It wasn't just the adults in the situation, right? And like my daughter was the one that was really struggling with it because she could see it,
This is your older child.
my older, yeah, she's 8.
Yeah.
And she stopped wanting to go to school because she didn't want to leave me alone, make sure I was okay. And she was just terrified that this was our future too. And I remember her telling me, like, Mommy, I can't be me unless you are you. And you so badly want to be you again, but you're just in this impossible situation where if you haven't been dizzy, you can't understand how it's not like, I mean, I know we talk about pain and so many other things, but it's just, it's where you are in the world. It's everything. It's just so consuming that it's really hard to be you.
Yeah. So this is a few months in, you're already in the depths of it like this.
Yeah.
And
I had completely isolated myself. I stopped picking up the phone. I was pushing everybody away that I could. Like, even my husband, I told him, like, I would leave him. I was just like, if I can't get better, I'm not going to hold you back. And this isn't your future. This will be mine. It's such an isolating journey. And like, if you're there and you're listening to this and you feel that way, like, I get it. It's so hard. It's just, my friends were calling my husband and my mom, like, trying to get updates and trying to understand where I was and if I was okay. And because I couldn't be that person for them.
Yeah. And, as you're saying this, there are people out there who get to where you were at that point and stay there. And you didn't, thankfully. I mean, this is why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
But I've wondered if you thought about that. Like, what do you think positioned you to be able to get out of it?
I think a lot of it was finding you and moving through it. And for those people, like, there were times that I don't think I would have ever hurt myself, but when I would wake up and be disappointed, I woke up because it was just, I have to do this again. I have to fight again. And I don't know if I have it in me. And so, I get it. And this is kind of jumping ahead. We talked about this a little bit, but with neural circuit dizziness, there's this constant like back and forth, and this happened like after I started to heal, right? A little bit. So when you're in the depths of it, you're in this place where it's constant and it's 24/7. But then you start to see these glimmers of hope, and it's a constant 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it's a special kind of torture. And it's like it makes you question everything, because you're like, oh, I'm getting better, I can do this, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can't tell you how many times, and there's another member in our community who I've had several conversations with, and he's like, I've thought that same thing, where it's like, I just need 2 more days, I just need 2 more weeks, I just need whatever it is, X amount of time, and I'm going to have this down. And it's right when you believe it and you're like holding on to that, and that hope is building, that like your brain is like, nope, just kidding. Like you're back in this hell. And I mean, I was sobbing, asking my husband, like, I really don't, he's like, how can you say you're not getting better? And it's like, I honestly don't know that I am, like, yes, am I better than physically swaying? Sure. But once you get to that 75, 80%, whatever that is, it's such an incremental change. And I think you've said this, like with many of the people you see, like you make big strides and then you get there and you're like, okay. And then it's these like imperceptible changes.
The tail is so long.
Yeah. And it's, for me, like that was almost the hardest part, almost, just because you're questioning everything. And is this truly going to be my forever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So you found me.
Yeah.
You started, so you had been in this Facebook group, but somehow you found me. Was this just kind of after like feverishly Googling things? Like, how did that happen?
Actually, I found you in the Facebook group.
Okay. Well, that's good, because I've heard that actually Facebook groups are not allowing my stuff to be posted in some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually it was a comment. It wasn't like an actual post. It was a comment reply to somebody's post. And they had posted your optokinetic stripes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And I saw it and I was like, I don't know. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I had read, and I started to watch a couple of your videos, but I was skeptical. And
totally get that. Yeah.
And almost a little disappointed. Like, it's weird to think like, I wish there was something structurally wrong with me, but you kind of do, because if that's something that's fixable, give me a medication, give me a procedure, and I will be better. This fluffy, ethereal, like, try to calm your nervous system and don't be afraid. Agree. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, how am I supposed to get there? And it's amorphous, right? And so I think it was a little bit of a battle for me to buy into it, but eventually I tried the OKM stripes, and so I was left to right, leaning left. So I watched your stripes go to the right, and I think I even put this, like, I commented on your YouTube, because I got up and I was like, oh, like, that didn't do anything. And I went to bed that night and I woke up. And there's so many of these things like happened overnight because your brain reconsolidates everything. And I woke up and I was swaying front to back.
Oh, funny.
And
Oh
it
my
was the
gosh.
first time that my sway had changed. And so I even commented like, what do I do with this? And you're like, I don't know. There's not really a lot of like official studies. So I kind of just did the same thing. I was like, well, I'm leaning more forward. So I tipped the iPad above my head and looked up. And
I know I can't like officially advise people to do that because it's not studied, but I'm like, anecdotally, I've commented this sometimes. Anecdotally, I've heard some people
yeah,
do that.
and so that's what I did. And I
Yeah.
went to bed that night, and the sway was gone.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it came back. I did it one more time, and it was officially like gone. But I was still really dizzy,
Yeah.
But and so one day I was sitting on the couch, and I just had this thought, and I thought like, this is never going away. And I mean, no word of a lie. Like within maybe 2 to 5 seconds, I was running to the bathroom to vomit. And I thought, okay, if I like, maybe she's not wrong. Like maybe there's something to this, because if I could have such a visceral physical reaction from a thought, like this is mental. And I think that's really when I started to dive in, and like I started your dizziness course. I joined the membership community, and I think that's probably when things really started to kind of to change. And interestingly, as I sort of started to wrap my mind around this mind body thing, like so much of this is hindsight. But I've always had like sciatic pain here and there. You have a long day, you work out too hard, you get some pain, you go to bed and it's gone. But right before the cruise, for about 3 weeks, I had, from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, sciatic pain. And hindsight, right? Like that was my red flag. My body was like, this is enough. I'm starting to try to get you to slow down. And then I took a cruise, and it was like, oh, this is a great feeling, And so that's I swear that I was already getting those red flags, and I just didn't know to look out for them.
And I hope we can talk a little bit more about, like, again, kind of in hindsight, what some of that stuff was. But I did want to ask you to clarify something, if you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind. So when you said, oh, maybe this is mental, I think some people are going to hear that and be like, are you saying that this is just psychological and
Right.
the feelings are in my head? So can you clarify what you mean by mental?
Yeah, I mean it's super real, right? Like I didn't imagine running to the bathroom to throw up. That was real, and so I think that there's an element of, you give this example, right? Like you get embarrassed. It's an emotion. It's a whatever. It's an emotion. It's in your brain, and then you physically blush. So your dizziness is real. All these things are real. It's just how your brain is processing them and reacting to them, and that's getting you to this point.
Yes. Yes. So not mental like fake, but mental
No,
as in
no, very real.
your brain is kind of the at fault party here.
For sure.
Right. And it's generating the dizziness. It's not that there's something broken about your body.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there's anything else. I think it's, and even when you get better, like there's this element of like not really knowing and being able to be sure that you're there, because I think there are so many like backs and forwards and ups and downs, and you always sort of question like, is this it? Am I better? Or is this just an up before a dip? And that can cast like a real shadow, and it's tough. We even rescheduled this interview. We had it scheduled earlier, and even though I was physically better, like there's an emotional element. I still felt like I couldn't be authentic in this interview because I was still living in shades of gray. Like I was doing the things, I was going about my life. I was, taking my kids to do whatever, and but there was a shadow over it, and I describe it as like living in black and white, because the color just hadn't returned. I was doing the things, going through the motions, but there
You
was
were still living under threat, essentially. That's
there
what it
wasn't a
sounds
lot of
like.
joy behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, that is definitely, it's hard to really get out of this thing. And even still, right? Like I'm not saying that I never wake up and think like, oh, please, don't be dizzy today or anything like that. It's a form of like PTSD, right? It's going to be with you for a while, and it's just going to take time.
Mm-hmm.
Something else I really learned was practicing being steady, and that was something that helped me.
Mm-hmm.
So it started at night for me because I would lay in the bed and the bed would rock. And there was a point between the rock at the bottom of the lull that there was an instantaneous lull where I was still. And I would close my eyes and I would focus really, really hard and just try to hold that instant for just a moment longer.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like attribute it like it's like lifting weights, right? You start lifting 20 pounds and you can do maybe 8 reps, and then maybe you practice and you work out more and you can do 10, and then you can do 12, and then you can lift 30. And so much of my dizziness was almost a practice. Like there's with weights, it's intensity and duration. And for me, it was intensity and duration with my dizziness as well. And so that was something that really helped me.
And how do you do that so this is like the $1 million question. How do you practice being steady without becoming obsessed and like, kicking yourself when invariably the movement starts again?
Yeah, I would really try to stay calm, and I would say this out loud. Like I would hold on to that moment, and then I would start to sway again, and I would be like, no, brain, like that's not it. Go back, and
Mm-hmm.
you focus. And sometimes I would get it, and sometimes I wouldn't, and
Mm-hmm.
that was okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like if you were working out, if you can't lift that weight that time, you try again later. You're just not quite there yet, and that's okay.
And I love that. And what you're describing is probably, I mean, who am I to say? But I would say it's probably in the top 5 most difficult things about the recovery process, being outcome independent when it doesn't go well, like knowing you're still doing the right thing for your brain, even if it didn't result in an immediate change. I mean, people are
Yeah.
miserable. They want an immediate change. When you feel
Right.
this bad, you want an immediate change, of course.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's like, and like you said, like it's physical, it's emotional. You are in just turmoil, and for those of you like watching this, like we get it, and I'm so sorry you're there, but I do believe you can get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So we're going to get to more because I know you have other tools to share, but
Yeah.
just let me also clarify on the timeline just in case people are wondering. So thankfully, it sounds like you found me relatively early. So how far in? Well, you were like 3 months in?
Yeah, I
4
mean,
months
like I
in?
said, I found you pretty quickly. So probably within those first 3 or 4 weeks when I joined the Facebook group, but
Yeah.
there was some skepticism, and it probably took me maybe until the second month to try the OK and Stripes,
Okay.
um, and start to really immerse myself into this world.
Okay.
Um,
And for those of you who don't know what Joelle is talking about, I'll link that video on the in the video description. It's a visual exercise for people with rocking, swaying, and bobbing.
yeah,
So in
yeah,
case anyone's wondering.
right. And but anyway, I guess at this point, like I started to get a little bit better. And um, I went on. Oh, I went to Vegas for a wedding, and I was walking through the casinos like this and holding somebody's arm because
Mm.
I. I mean, this is about 2 months in, right before I probably started your program, and I mean, it was awful. I couldn't. Dizziness was so heightened in such a busy, both people wise and pattern wise, and lights and flashing, and just everything that could set off your vestibular system was right in your face. And we had to go for a walk because I needed to pick up a prescription off on the strip, and it this hailstorm came in, and I was pushing my toddlers in their carriage, and there was like hail and wind kicked up, and it was freezing. Like it was so cold. And I happened to be in part of the strip that there was no casino or anything to get into. And I just started running. And, an hour ago I was doing this. So like, talk about classic neural circuit. Like when the proverbial bear came,
Yes. You're fine. Yeah. Yeah.
I was fine. I could
you're fine.
do whatever. Yeah. And I ran probably like a half mile. And, but what I noticed for me was, in that moment, that rest of that evening, I was better. I wasn't not dizzy at all, but it had come down so far that it really was like an aha moment for me, that there's something to moving and there's something to running. I hate running. I am not a runner.
So do I.
I
Solidarity.
There's really not a lot of things I enjoy about it, but I was a Peloton rider, and if you're familiar with MdDS, they say you shouldn't ride anything stationary, like an elliptical, a treadmill, a bike, because something about the cyclical motion without forward progression can make your dizziness worse. So I had given that up. And
they say this, by the way, without
really
theoretical explanations. Yeah.
I ride my Peloton now and there's no issues.
Yes. Yes. I hate those kinds of blanket things. Oh, just don't travel anymore. Oh, right. Okay. Except, right.
So stop living your life.
Yeah.
So I started taking up running is where I'm going with this. And I do think that there was something about, feet on the ground that did help reset my proprioception to some degree. Mm-hmm. But really, I think what it did was it dropped the anxiety out of my body. And so I would really try to start almost every day with a run. And if you're not there, any kind of movement really is something that I think can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And that may just be walking back and forth around your house at first, and that's perfect. Yeah. Just build up. Yeah.
Right. And this is, again, it's all practice.
Mm-hmm.
All practice.
Yeah.
And let's see. So then some other things that I did were the OK and Stripes. Sorry, I've got a little list here.
Yeah.
I downloaded the Curable app. And I think that was really helpful for my anxiety. Did
you like the panic button?
Panic button.
I love the panic button. Yeah.
The panic buster, and then a couple of the visualization ones were just, they really worked for me. And that was really, really great. Of course, some of the breathing exercises, the education, the somatic tracking. Something that I kind of did, and I fell into, I mentioned I did see a vestibular therapist, but it was not helpful. I had my little sticker on the wall and I was doing my head movements and I could just feel the panic rising, and the dizziness just getting worse. And so eventually I had stopped that. But one night, this was probably further into my recovery, I used to do the Curable app when I put my twins down, because I would just be sitting in a dark room and they would be falling asleep. And so I had 15 or 20 minutes and I'd run through some exercises, and a somatic tracking exercise came up on my roadmap. And I was like, well, I'm not feeling dizzy right now. So how do I create this dizziness? And so I started to move my head back and forth, and it did spike the dizziness. But I learned that I can do some vestibular therapy, but I always paired it with somatic tracking so that I could keep calm and I could learn. It was almost like exposure therapy, right?
Yes, I was just about to say, you were in control though, also.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was something that I would say even quintessential, like typical VNG or vestibular therapy, wasn't super helpful, but this
that did form. Yeah.
Make a difference. And as far as VRT goes, I think the best VRT I did was things like playing soccer with my kids, or I would play keep away with my dog. Something that had lateral movement, forward movement, maybe some hand-eye or eye-foot coordination.
Totally.
Things that challenged my vestibular system, but in a form of play.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
So like, what are some of the facilitating factors for neuroplasticity? So connection, joy,
yeah,
like motivation,
and
like,
all
so it's not just let's just shake my head back and forth in front of a card. Like, let's leverage all that other stuff. So play is an incredible way to get your brain to learn new stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think believing it's actually neural circuit dizziness. Even you can be skeptical. I was, but
Mhm.
leaving that door open, just a crack,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
things start to open that door organically
Mhm.
as you learn and things start to work. Um, Community is huge, right? Even though I had an amazing support system, and like shout out to my mom and my mother-in-law and my husband who were round the clock
Mhm.
for me and tag teaming when it was bad. They were incredible, but they could not understand what you're going through and what you're feeling and how pervasive it is in everything you're feeling. And um, so I think being able to join your community, if you're like a YouTube subscriber and you're not part of the membership community, like, and you're on the fence, like, go do it.
It's pretty great. The people, I mean, it's just a collection of the most incredibly, like, open-hearted and compassionate people.
They
It's
get,
incredible. It's just an incredible group of people.
yeah, they get it. And, if you're having a down day, they can lift you up. It feels great when somebody else is having a down day that you can lift them up. And it's not just like toxic positivity. I mean, it's a
It's
very
not.
real community, but it's uplifting. And like I said, I met, if you meet people where you actually connect with them. I had dinner with somebody from our group. I've had phone conversations with people from our group. And, one person in particular, we text back and forth all the time, like, how are you this week? Where are you? Are you still feeling this? And
You get like a little buddy,
yeah,
a little buddy, or triads. I've seen triads, like little three, 3 people have a text chain that they start getting involved in.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's so helpful because this is such an isolating condition, right? So
Yeah.
be able to have people that you trust and get it is great. Um,
Mhm.
I picked up meditation. I think you actually had an interview with somebody, and she was talking about this as well, where there's some studies out there that your brain can't almost differentiate like between practicing something and
That
actually doing the thing.
Yeah, I think that was Mary Claire. We talked
Yes.
about
Yeah.
portrayals. Yeah. Mhm.
And so for me, it's practicing healing, right? So
Mhm.
practicing healing, even if I was dizzy at that moment, like in my mind, closing my eyes and setting an intention and believing I wasn't dizzy and setting an intention for what it would look like if I wasn't dizzy. I would envision my life in a normal state. And,
Mhm.
um, I would see myself running around with my kids or going and doing things that I might be fearful of, going to the grocery store, whatever it might be. And something else I did with that was I would pair it with an emotion. So it's when you're thinking about and setting the intention of healing and you're envisioning your life healed, but then you also like go inside and you start feeling it, like what would that feel like? Okay, it would feel joyful, I would feel grateful, I would feel, you know light, but and not just like verbalizing it, but like actually feeling it, those emotions in your body. And I think that there was something really powerful about pairing that emotion with the
Totally.
intention, for my brain to like
Mhm.
my brain and my soul, right?
Yes.
To kind of come together in setting me in motion towards that goal.
I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, and because I have a question for you about this. So this is a tool that I totally, I mean, obviously, the proof is right here in front of you that it works, right? But I worry about is that what tends to get people into neural circuit dizziness in the first place is also trying to think themselves out of emotions, like, and out of difficult emotions in particular.
Yeah.
And that's also something I know that you've done some work on. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how you paired that, like, envisioning yourself in this better place with also working on the more difficult and and challenging and painful things that also kind of got you here?
Yeah. So that was actually going to be, I mean, a great segue was going to be my like last tip was like, if you're in a place where you can sort of find somebody to help you, you know, I have a therapist. I found a therapist. I started with the Better Mind Center, and
Mhm.
you know that they were great for like reassuring me on a general like mind body this is normal condition. But I was really looking for somebody to help guide me um, in that. And
Mhm.
so, you know, here's I guess another tip: like, don't be afraid to say no. If you're in the position where you're looking for a therapist, I went through five. It was hard to do five interventions before I found somebody to make progress with, especially when you're like, I just want to get better. I just want to get better. Like, I just want to move this forward. And
And
I was,
does it need to be someone who's a dizziness specialist?
no,
It
no,
does not.
no.
Correct. Yes.
She has no experience in dizziness, but she does have this. My particular therapist did have some mind body experience.
Mhm.
And one of the best tips I got was from a girlfriend, and I had met with a therapist, and she was like, well, how was it? And I was like, oh, like I think it was good. And she was like, no, it wasn't. And I was like, I'm sorry. And she was like, no, like with don't don't sell yourself short. Like with therapists, it's a hell yes or it's a hard pass. And I appreciate her for saying that because the person I found combines EMDR with internal family systems, and it's really a beautiful mix. And we can talk a little bit more about internal family systems because I know that that's like something that you love, and I have
Mhm.
come to love it. But it's kind of an interesting blend because I do have so much capital T like trauma events. EMDR has worked really well
And it's really good for those things.
yeah, for
Yes.
like
Yes.
thing like
Yes.
losing people and these types of things. And um and
Have
so
had
but
you had talk therapy about those things before?
no, I
Before? Okay.
know.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and so, but the way she kind of combines it is like, you're going the light bar and
Mhm.
these images or, memories are coming up. And then what she's really great at is pairing that with like tying that to your emotion. So I feel angry about that memory. Okay, let's pause the EMDR and let's go into IFS and let's go to that part and like talk to the angry part. And so it's really a beautiful combination.
Mhm.
And if you're not familiar with IFS, like I recommend it to literally everybody. I'm like, go read No Bad Parts.
Yeah.
um, you're gonna sound like a crazy person, but it's amazing. You're like trying to describe it to your friends. You're like, and we have all these parts inside of us, and they talk to each other, and they're like, okay.
Yeah. Oh, there you are.
Sorry, my somebody ring the phone.
No, yeah. No
Okay.
worries. You're good.
So
But yeah, I know. They're like, "Oh, you have multiple personality disorder?"
right,
Like, is that what
right,
that means?
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I can remember one time, and it again practice, right? Like I was doing this exercise, and I was working on like a fear part, and we were kind of going through it, and I was deep in with fear, and all of a sudden, this is an expletive, but I'll PG it. Out of nowhere, I heard, "I effing hate you," and it was just like, what? I think I'm losing my mind. Like I was
I was talking to
completely
myself.
I was
Yeah.
completely engrossed in something else, and like another whole part of me was like, mad at this other part. And it's a crazy it's a crazy thing. And these parts, they call you on your stuff too, which is hilarious. Like there was an instance where I was like, but we've always been us, like we've always been true to ourselves. And my part stood up, was like, no, we haven't. And I was like, oh, okay, you're right.
Wow. Oh my
um
gosh. I want to just say something here for people. So I think some of the people watching are going to be like, "Oh yeah, we've heard Yonit talk about this before." Some people are going to be like, "What the are they talking about?" Right?
yeah,
So, the what I've talked about in many of my previous videos is that you you're not usually going to be able to analyze yourself out of symptoms because
right,
the symptoms are being generated uh, fear mode in your brain, by danger mode in your brain. Danger mode is not a logical process. That's way later. Your brain does not care about logic and thinking and all that stuff when it thinks that you are in danger of dying. So um, IFS is not the only type of therapy that helps people, but the reason IFS is so effective is because it gets people out of their thinking minds and into kind of this more imaginative, emotional state of mind. And that honestly, it's a way of exploring those layers of your awareness that you're not necessarily able to think through on a daily basis. Like we all have a kind of a simple example, right? Everyone has like the work persona. You go to work and you're this person when you're at work, and then you go home and you act differently with your family.
Sure.
So that's a very normal thing to switch kind of your personas that way, depending on where you are. So what IFS does is it basically just normalizes that switching and says it's actually more complicated than that, but depending on the specific breakdown of the scenario that you're facing, you're also kind of switching the parts of you that are in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And for those of you who've seen the movie Inside Out, it's kind of that concept a little bit. So yeah,
exactly.
And you found that helpful because I can tell you're very analytical. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, Joella, but you seem like a very detail oriented, very intelligent, like analytical person. You probably have done really well in life, relying on kind of your logic.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like this type of therapy has allowed you to get away from that a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely softer, right? I mean, and you have to make space for it. You have to be, again, it's like cracking that door open. Like, this sounds crazy, but I'm gonna leave space for this to be real and for this to work. And as you practice it, just like practicing holding steady and just like practicing, the therapy, like you get better at it.
Yeah. So did you see, I'm curious, did you see so you were already kind of doing these other things that we talked about. So you were using Curable, you were doing somatic tracking, you're doing kind of this positive imagery, you're doing maybe some graded motor imagery, you're doing maybe meditation, calming the nervous system, educating yourself. It sounds like those things really started to help. So what do you think therapy contributed to this? Like did therapy give you an extra push? How did it contribute to the recovery?
I think it was introspection, right? Like, I think giving yourself a better understanding of yourself allows you to give yourself grace and self-compassion. Because I didn't have a lot of that for myself. I mean, I can't tell you how many times like I was not satisfied with how quickly this was going, or I think this is a good example, like for self-compassion, like you're never quite satisfied with your healing. Like, and so again, you go back and forth, and I would get so upset because it would, at first you're like, I'm 24/7 dizzy. So even moments, glimmers of stillness, you're like, this is amazing. And then, then you get to maybe like hours of stillness, and then that's incredible. But then you go back to moments of stillness, and what felt like a miracle is now just devastating. It's completely unacceptable. Like every time you go back, you're like, no, this is no longer okay. And it got to the point where I, in my healing, where I was having what I call swoons. And for the majority of my day, I was fine. But it would be one of those things where you're like kind of walking along or doing whatever and not conscious of it at all. And then you're just like, whoa, oh, there it is. And it would last maybe 2, 3, 4 seconds. It was quick. But I distinctly remember like walking down the stairs and having a swoon. And at that point I was getting like maybe once or twice an hour. And I was like, you know what? I could live like this. I could do this forever. If this was my forever, like I could completely be okay with this. This is amounting to like 60 seconds a day of dizziness. I can get over that. And then I got to like maybe once or twice a day or 5 times a day. And then when I went back to once or twice an hour, I mean, that was probably the hardest dip I ever had, because I really saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I just was so mad at myself. I mean, I didn't get out of bed I probably went through a roll of toilet paper. Like, my husband was just like, I was just like, bawling. And he let me kind of be in that. And I think that that's important to like feel those feelings and have that self-compassion. But, it's also important to remember what helped. And the next day we woke up and he was like, okay, what are we doing? You can pick. You're going to run. We're going to go for a hike. We're going to, we're going to do whatever you're going to get on the bike and, you can pick, but whatever you do, I'm coming with you. And like, we're going to do it. And again, I wanted to punch him in the face, but it was the right thing. Like he knew that those were the things that helped me move forward. And, I had to get back on the horse. And, anyway, this was like kind of a digression from the self-compassion thing. But, I think, my therapist actually taught me an amazing technique. And if it's okay, maybe we can
Of course.
try it.
Absolutely.
And so this is like her key to self-compassion. And it's 3 steps. And the first step is I'm sorry. The second is I'm sorry, I forgive you, or I'm working to forgive you, and I love you. And you can say this, you can do this exercise not just for dizziness, but you can do it like if you got frustrated with your kids and then you feel really bad about that, or, and you're just kicking yourself, or, for me, I did this mostly with the part of my brain that was dizzy, and I would talk to it. And so it kind of goes something like this. Like for me, I would say, okay, I'm sorry that I didn't know how bad it was. I'm sorry that I didn't see the signs that you were giving me, and that you felt that this was your only option, that you were backed into a corner. That somehow, as bad and awful as dizziness feels, that somehow being dizzy is better than the pain that you were in. And,
This is speaking to that emotional part of your brain that produced the danger mode signal.
Right. And so then it's like, I'm not there, but I'm working to forgive you. You've taken many months of my life away from me, and my kids have hurt, and that's hard for me to grasp, but I understand why it had to be this way. And I love you because I know you were just trying to protect me. I know that you were trying to ultimately make me better, and that this was the only way that I was going to stop and figure these things out. And then, at the end of that exercise, you sort of go back into your body, and like, are you softer? Do you have those, are you lighter? And, something that like my therapist told me was like, sometimes your parts and these things don't talk in words, right? Like you can just go, you have this ball in your chest, and then once you're done with this exercise, that ball is not as tight. And so sometimes these parts communicate to you in feeling. And and it's important to not, because of my analytical brain, I'm always expecting words, but it's not always that way.
Yeah.
So I think therapy really helped me create this ability to be introspective and understand why, and have compassion, and give myself the grace that I needed to heal, the acceptance.
And I want to clarify something very important here, because this is what you said. I was saying this to somebody yesterday. I think like the crux of my work is if I were to summarize everything that I say, that there's the kind of psychoeducation piece, and then there's the self-compassion, or like, I guess kind of the umbrella term, create safety for yourself, right? But I want to be clear about something that you said. So we're not saying that you should be self-compassionate and just for the purpose of easing the way while your brain does its thing.
Right.
It's actually actively taking a role in your healing, because self-compassion is a tremendous safety signal. We talk, again, I'm not going to go over the theory here, but basically danger mode being the reason why the brain gets stuck in these circuits in the first place. Again, whether that's due to chronic stress or ongoing other stuff that's not stressful, that people aren't perceiving as stressful, the brain makes these errors because it's not going to worry so much about making good predictions when it thinks that you're in danger. And so your job, the name of the game here, is making your brains feel safe. I mean, that's anything that you can do to make your brain feel safe. And self-compassion, like you're describing, there is no greater signal than that.
Right.
Maybe a safe for someone else giving you compassion, but without self-compassion, you can't even take in someone else's compassion. Self-compassion is a prerequisite for taking in compassion from other people. It is a baseline requirement. So this is a central component of healing, what you're describing right now.
Yeah. And I want to say, like, if you're not in a place to bring in a therapist, like, there are ways to do this on your own. I mean, try that exercise I just went through. IFS. I mean, the beautiful thing about IFS is, even though she would incorporate it into our sessions, like, I would always try to do one IFS session at home, like in the bath or something, where I was like calm and there was no interruptions. You can do these things, on your own, or join the community. We have a subgroup where you guys can meet partners and you can go back and forth with each other. I mean, there are ways to do this very inexpensively, and it really is. I can't say enough about how it's gotten me to where I'm at.
Yes. And also just another couple ideas for people. If they're like, all right, this is too fluffy, like, I don't know, just give me like the hard facts. How do I do this? There's a workbook called the Self-Compassion Workbook, where if you can put your skepticism aside long enough to just do the exercises, you can kind of brainwash yourself into being self-compassionate. Wow, I think that book's probably never previously been described that way. But yeah, sometimes going through the motions, faking it till you make it in a way with self-compassion actually does work. You are still getting somewhere with that. So another option for people. And I'll put the name of that book in the video description as well. Yeah. Thank you, Joella. That was very insightful. Thank you. And so you say again, and you summarized it so clearly, and I'm so enthusiastic about your response. I just want to make sure also that I don't forget to touch on this, because you've mentioned that you've had these traumatic experiences earlier in your life, but I'm wondering also if you ever unpacked what was going on in your life, like right before the cruise, if there was anything there that was kind of stirring things up.
Yeah. So I think it was just a lot of stress. I mean, it was around the holidays. Um, you know,
So it was 2022 holidays,
yeah,
2022.
yeah,
Okay. And we're in August of 2023 now.
yeah. And so,
Okay.
I mean, I can't really pinpoint exactly
Mhm.
what it was. I just think, you've got all the kids programs, and you're juggling, and you're doing
Mhm.
presents, and the holidays are lovely, but they're also, like, for a mom, a crazy time of stress. And
Mhm.
and then we're prepping for the cruise, and I happen to be, not that this isn't like a martyr statement, I hope it doesn't come across that way, but, like, I was sort of the glue, right? There were lots of groups that were latching onto the cruise. Like I said, there were like 20 of us, but this person also knew this person, but I kind of was the one that knew everybody. And so I think there was some level of stress. Like, I even made, custom cups for everybody on the cruise. Like, it was just, I was adding far too much to my plate, and, just adding and adding. But I don't know that it was that. I think it was just an amalgamation of everything that
Right. Right.
gets
And
you.
thank you for speaking to that, because people think sometimes that it has to be an unusual stressor. And it's just it can just be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It doesn't necessarily need to be like the world's greatest stressor. Sometimes you got a cold,
Yeah.
and that's what it was, and it was the
Right.
stress of the cold. But as you spoke to, you had kind of these very difficult formative experiences that really you hadn't really had to face or process up until that point. And so if we kind of just add the mounting stress that was just mounting, and that stuff had never really been dealt with, at some point your, as I say, your stress bucket just kind of got full, and your brain was like, okay, we're done, she's in danger, we're
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that I mean, this is, again, there's a point where, like, I think this is like one of those things that so many of us we talk about, like, we don't feel our feelings, and we hide, and we because we are type A's and
Mhm.
pleasers, we, like, push all that stuff down. And I mean, like, a great example, and this is a little bit personal, but I mean, I think it just really speaks to my mentality is like, after going back and, looking back on all this, like, I didn't cry at my dad's funeral. And because I didn't want to be a burden to anybody else. And of course, it would be perfectly natural for a 16-year-old to cry at her dad's funeral.
Oh,
But like,
Joella.
but I didn't, and these are things that like these little gems, right? That like, I'm like, oh, like that's unhealthy. Like, these are things that I need to work on. And I hate to be like, oh, I'm so thankful for dizziness. But because it's not quite that. But
Right.
I,
We can still say it sucked. You would never wish it on your worst enemy.
yeah. But
Um,
I learned a lot. I mean, these were things that I had like completely forgotten about. And
mhm.
looking back as an almost 40-year-old person, and you're looking back at this little 16-year-old person, you're like, that these were things that evolved and created the person I am now, and they needed to change. Something needed to give.
Yes. Wow. So, with all that being said, as you kind of saw this working and so kind of saw it in action, I mean, really, you started. I'm not. It was clearly not linear. You've talked about the ups and downs, but you had enough to go on as evidence. Like, okay, there is something to this. This is actually working for me.
Yeah.
Um, You've gotten braver and braver. So can you tell us about some of the various things that you've done to challenge these prevailing, just
Yeah.
completely ludicrous ideas that people with MdDS shouldn't do certain things? So
Right.
please.
Yeah. So, been on Peloton. I ride it almost, 3 or 4 times a week.
Mhm.
No problems. As a cruise initiated MdDS person, you would think boats are a little scary. I've gone on boats a number of times.
Mhm.
We have a little pontoon boat. It's like one of our favorite things to do with the kids. And that was honestly one of the hardest things. Was I thought, like, I'm never going to be able to do this again, because I'm never going to let my brain feel that sensation again so it could latch onto it. But as I've learned to trust this process, it's like, yeah, it wasn't the sensation that caused the dizziness. It's this, right? It's your heart and your soul and your psyche. And so it really had nothing to do with the boat. So I got on a boat. I've done wakeboarding. I've been on roller coasters. You name it. Like, I keep testing those like little bounds, like, please let this not be okay. But I think there's a part of it, like, believing it is what's making it not have any effect on me, right? Like, I don't believe that it will. I go into riding a roller coaster that I think I'm going to be fine, and I am.
Right. And this is probably super hard for people to hear because it could be easy to hear that and say, "Oh, you just have to believe it." And then they'll say, "It's just a placebo." But like, that's
It,
not,
that's not quite it. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It's the, I, I'm totally pro placebo. Like, let's placebo the heck out of whatever,
I
right?
don't care if it's a
If
placebo.
it works,
I
yeah.
feel good. I'm fine.
But
Placebo
but
all
that's
day long.
but the more a placebo works, if it is a placebo, the more the belief, like, it not not that term, but like the more a belief in something affects you, the more reinforcement you get. Oh, this is totally based on my brain perceiving something in a certain way. It has nothing to
Right.
do with something wrong with my vestibular system.
Yeah, and I'll say I didn't do these things when I was in the throes of it, right? This
Right.
was well into 85, 90% healed, where
Mhm.
and I had really internalized the NCD, the mind body
Mhm.
message. And so at this point, I knew it was my nervous system causing this and not, external forces.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and maybe believing isn't if I just believe it, but it was like the sense of knowing.
Yes, a felt sense is what I will often call it, a felt sense. I know that's so fluffy for those of you who are like,
Yeah.
"What?" But there's a felt sense of, like, okayness, like, I'm really gonna be okay, that's one of safety. I mean, that's what I mean when I say safety.
All about it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Joella, this is all incredible. I wanted to ask, because I know you have copious notes. So, is there anything I didn't ask about that we should talk about, or any other advice you wanted to give to people?
Yeah. So I guess just for a couple like little things for advice going
Mhm.
forward. Again, find the right therapist if you're going to do that. Um, maybe take some baselines. And this was something like, so I talked about my Vegas experience. And then 2 months later, I had gone to Vegas with my husband for our birthdays. And we were like up an elevator, 32 stories. And I looked out over the balcony, 32 stories. And, we swam and we went all around and we walked through the casinos and I had no issues. And, there was one point I walked over this bridge and it had horizontal slats and vertical shadows and, it's rickety and you're like, whoa, and so your vestibular system's on fire. And then, 2 months later, you're walking across that bridge without issue. And it's those little things that I think if you can find them when you are in a dip, like you hold on to those things with everything you have, because you're like, no, that dark thought that comes in and is like, you're not healing, you're not making progress, this isn't working. You can be like, no, it is because I walked across that bridge last week and I couldn't do that 2 months ago. So it's just like a kind of a tactical thing, but it really is like something that I held on to.
Yeah, like the avoidance scale. I suggest people use, rather than tracking symptoms, track how badly you hate something
Yeah,
or how much you don't want to do something, or how much you want to do something, I suppose, is another way.
yeah.
Yeah.
This is like super cheesy, but like it's a saying that I think I clung to because I did have a lot of self-talk, and it was, be careful what you say because you're listening.
You're right.
And so I think that's just like a silly little thing, but one I'd like to leave you guys with. And then, I think maybe the last thing is, and this is sort of like hopefully speaking to the heart of like the people who are in this, like I think it's easy to watch these and go like, oh, like I don't know if I'll ever get there, or that's not me, or you find something that like that self-talk, that negative talk comes through, and you start to question like whether you'll get there. And I want to, obviously my whole journey and everything I've just spoken to hopefully says this, but it's not linear. And if you're in that place where you're struggling, like know that I was there too. And just because you're there now doesn't mean you can't be here at some point. And like I know I know it's like just a struggle to hold on. And you know you think that you're giving it everything you have just to be strong, and um, you're not sure what tomorrow holds, but like just I guess just keep pushing, like if you have it in you, and if you don't, that's okay today, but don't forget to try to keep going at some point, because um, this battle is winnable.
Totally. Yeah. Wow. Of course, I agree with everything you said. But you've just lived through it. So I hope people listen. I hope people listen, because I've said before, I've said this in the community, so you've probably heard me say this, but I think people with MdDS are given particularly hopeless messages, um, compared to people with other diagnoses. And your brain's listening. Your brain's listening when you get these kinds of messages, and it does affect people's recoveries or ability to recover. Yeah.
So you're healing, you're strong, you're a fighter, like go forth.
Yes.
You can do it. You can do it.
Yes. Wow. Thank you, Joella. This has been remarkable. And again, on a selfish note, it's been such a delight to finally get to actually meet you in person and hear the whole story from beginning to end, because I've been kind of witnessing it in bits and pieces. So this is very cathartic for me too, to get to
Oh,
hear the whole story.
and thank you so much. I don't think I would be here. I mean, my mom has literally called you my guardian angel through this. Like,
Oh,
I don't think I would be here without all the things that you have provided and given to me through this journey.
thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for saying that. One of the things I'm working on is trying to not deflect when people say things like that to me. So this is one of the things I've been working on. Um, it's honestly, it's completely my privilege. It is so like I'm amazed that I get to do this. So
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Yeah. You're making a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Thank you. And also so grateful to hear that at a time when, again, my channel and all that other stuff, it's growing. So I take more heat nowadays than I used to. Like, not before, when I was talking like 200 people, no one cared, but now people get mad about the things I say. So thank you. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. And I know you found Joella's story inspirational. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them below. And of course, if you enjoyed this, like, share, subscribe to my channel. And thank you, Joella.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Yes.
Bye.